basically at WrestleMania, at Survivor Series in '97, excuse me, but a different version of it. So, I was thinking, I went away from that thinking, okay, they bring Bret Hart after 12 years, back after 12 years, and they treat him like dirt. So I thought at the end of that, that was it. We weren't going to see Bret Hart anymore. But there were these wrestling fans who were diehard wrestling fans who knew Bret Hart was coming back. So around WrestleMania time, we get the ultimatum from Vince McMahon. He's challenging Bret Hart to a match at WrestleMania 26, and I think at this point, Vince McMahon has done everything there is to do in the book. What more can you do? You booked yourself in the 90s in a feud with Stone Cold Steve Austin. You feuded and worked with every wrestler there is to work with. And now you're putting yourself in a match against Bret Hart at WrestleMania 26. Going into WrestleMania 26, WWE knew the match that was going to get WrestleMania over that year was Shawn Michaels and The Undertaker, because Shawn Michaels was retiring after a legacy. You didn't have any faith on the Bret Hart-Vince McMahon feud to sell WrestleMania. People bought WrestleMania, I think WrestleMania 26 that year, yes, to see Bret Hart versus Vince McMahon, but the purpose of purchasing WrestleMania 26 was to see Shawn Michaels versus The Undertaker. Nobody bought WrestleMania to see Bret Hart versus Vince McMahon, because if you followed Bret Hart's career for 20 years, you knew the difference between Bret Hart the wrestler and Bret Hart the entertainer, and that's something that the Survival of the Hitman documentary for 90 minutes documented, the difference between Bret Hart the wrestler and Bret Hart the entertainer, and I can never emphasize on that enough. What you got for $50 in 2010 to see Vince McMahon versus Bret Hart was Bret Hart the entertainer doing a couple of moves here and there, a couple of vintage Bret Hart moves, and that was it. And then he eventually made Vince McMahon tap out to the sharpshooter, which was an obvious finish for a match that took 12 years to book. I think that, nobody bought WrestleMania 26 to see Bret Hart versus Vince McMahon, and if it came out to be that the majority of the people who had purchased WrestleMania 26 and sacrificed $50 to see WrestleMania 26 was to see Bret Hart versus Vince McMahon over Shawn Michaels and The Undertaker, who was always a phenomenal match to see, booked at any event, regardless if it was a WrestleMania or not. If you go back as far as the 90s, if it came out to be that people had actually purchased WrestleMania 26 to see Vince McMahon versus Bret Hart, I would be very, very surprised, because I don't think anybody bought WrestleMania 26 to see Bret Hart versus Vince McMahon. I had the opportunity to sit down here on the program with Jim the Emerald Neidhart for the first time and speak to him about the whole Bret Hart versus Vince McMahon thing at WrestleMania 26. And he believed in his own mind that when Bret Hart took the chair and hit Vince McMahon 20 times over the head with the chair, he didn't believe that Vince McMahon and Bret Hart were letting bygones be bygones, and he didn't believe to a certain extent that Bret Hart and Vince McMahon were putting the past behind them. He believed that Vince McMahon was giving Bret Hart the opportunity to get out any frustration he had built up inside of him over the last 12 years, and probably that was the case. Anytime you see somebody hit someone in the head 20 times with a chair and make it look as real as Bret Hart did, obviously there is some kind of animosity still built up inside of Bret Hart for Vince McMahon, and you can't blame him for doing that. I mean, the guy was booked to win in his home country, and then WWE turns a totally different angle in the face of everybody, especially Bret Hart. It seemed like everybody knew Bret Hart was going to lose that night except for Bret Hart, and that wasn't fair by any means. After the whole WrestleMania deal is over, they make him be the general manager for about 30 days, which was pointless. There was absolutely no reason to make Bret Hart the general manager of Raw. He comes out and the biggest thing he does in a month is fire Batista, who hasn't been seen since, who probably will never be seen again unless he's booked for a major match against John Cena, or the Brock Lesnar-Batista match is eventually put into fruition for us. That's the biggest thing he does in a month, and he makes a number one contender for the WWE Championship. That's all Bret Hart does. Then he's fired, and then we start the whole anonymous general manager thing with the computer that's gotten over very well in the last year. So again, Vince McMahon knows what he's doing over someone like Bret Hart. Bret Hart doesn't know how to be a general manager. That's why he was taken out of the role as quickly as he was. And I think that the whole general manager thing with Bret Hart was stupidly done. It was just done to give Bret Hart something to do after WrestleMania. That was the obvious thing Bret Hart was going to do, and it was speculated when Bret Hart was put in the position of being the general manager of Raw that it wasn't going to last long. It was going to last anywhere from 2 weeks to a month, and that's what happened. In my opinion, what you should have done, if you knew you were doing the whole anonymous general manager thing, you were going to turn Michael Cole heel, and you were going to eventually reveal that he was the general manager, then you should have immediately done that after WrestleMania. You shouldn't have wasted time by giving Bret Hart a role he didn't know how to work, he didn't know how to do. You should have just immediately jumped into the whole, okay, we've got this anonymous general manager of Raw, who the fuck is it? You shouldn't have had Bret Hart, come off a match with Vince McMahon at WrestleMania, and then have Vince McMahon, who is the head of it all, make Bret Hart the general manager of Raw. Who's going to believe that Vince McMahon approved of Bret Hart being the general manager of Raw after the beating he gave him in that lumberjack match at WrestleMania 26? Nobody's going to believe that. That's just the same thing as they did in 2009 when they had Donald Trump buy Raw from Vince McMahon. Who in their right mind would believe that Vince McMahon actually sold Raw to Donald Trump in the first place? So, it's very hard to believe that Vince McMahon will put Bret Hart in the position of being the Raw general manager where he could make Vince McMahon's life a living hell. I mean, that doesn't make any sense. That's insulting the intelligence of a professional wrestling fan. It's like Vinny the Guido told me one time here on HCW Entertainment Variety Radio. You're insulting the intelligence of the fan when you're making them believe that Vince McMahon made Bret Hart the general manager of Raw. When you're making them believe that Donald Trump bought Raw from Vince McMahon and Vince McMahon actually agreed to sell it. You're insulting the fan's intelligence by making him believe these stupid storylines. And I think that anyone who believes that Bret Hart was a good general manager of Raw is flat out stupid. I don't believe that Bret Hart was a good general manager of Raw. I don't think any of the roles after the aftermath of WrestleMania 26 was played on Raw and SmackDown. I don't think that any of the roles that Bret Hart did after WrestleMania were of any importance or any remembrance to WWE fans. And if anything Bret Hart's going to be remembered for, it's being the wrestler in the 90s. The reason he was put into the WWE Hall of Fame was not because of his return that he made in 2010. The reason he was put in the WWE Hall of Fame was because of the in-ring performer he was and amounted to in the 90s. He's definitely the greatest Hart who ever lived, out of every Hart that ever had the privilege of wrestling in the dungeon, no matter if you were a Hart or you weren't. I mean, people like Jericho and Chris Benoit and Tyson Kidd, who was the last person to train in the dungeon before the dungeon closed, were phenomenal performers. Everybody who came out of the dungeon basically amounted to being a world champion, except for the younger talent like Tyson Kidd, who probably will eventually be a world champion. I think that everybody definitely amounted to superstardom who came out of the dungeon. But without question, Bret Hart was the greatest wrestler to ever come out of the dungeon. Not because it was, the son of the person who owned the dungeon that amounted to anything. I think it was Bret Hart's devotion to the business that made him the performer he was. Bret Hart went into the WWE Hall of Fame for being one of the greatest Canadian wrestlers who ever lived and being able to survive the dungeon. I mean, if you take a look back at the footage of Bret Hart and Owen Hart wrestling each other down in the dungeon and Stu Hart having to pull them apart, that gives you reason to believe there that Bret Hart was a phenomenal performer. Not the stuff that he did in 2010. That's not the reason he went into the WWE Hall of Fame. And anyone who believes that Bret Hart went into the WWE Hall of Fame because they knew that he was going to make a comeback eventually, which eventually was 2010, is once again stupid. I think that you have to separate reality and professionalism and put it into two different categories. The reality is Bret Hart still has the animosity for Vince McMahon. Nobody ever walks away from the business and lets their animosity towards someone settle completely. I don't think Bret Hart will ever reach a point in his life between now and death where he puts the animosity he has for Vince McMahon behind him, because it's never going to happen. I think that, you can make 100 documentaries like Heart and Soul or Survival of the Hitman, which was recently put together by different networks. but you're never going to be able to chronicleize and document the Vince McMahon Bret Hart story the way that Bret Hart and Vince McMahon want to chronicleize it. It's nice to see that Bret Hart and Shawn Michaels will let bygones be bygones. Shawn Michaels went into the WWE Hall of Fame with absolutely no regrets. I think that Bret Hart's gone into the WWE Hall of Fame with a lot of regrets, but Shawn Michaels definitely hasn't, because Shawn Michaels has outperformed Bret Hart on every different level. And I say that with 100% confidence because I've watched Shawn Michaels' career all my life, and you cannot tell me that Bret Hart has been able to outperform Shawn Michaels in his career, because he hasn't. There are a lot of people Bret Hart has not been able to outperform. An example of that is Edge. 31 championships. Where's Bret Hart's 21 or 31 championships? They're not there. I mean, there are a lot of people who have outperformed Bret Hart in his career. The Undertaker has outperformed Bret Hart. Triple H has outperformed Bret Hart. The list goes on of people who have outperformed Bret Hart. Do I think he's deserving of his Hall of Fame induction? Yeah, I think he's deserving of his Hall of Fame induction. But no documentary, no Survival of the Hitman, no Heart and Soul DVD, nothing is going to be able to chronicleize the Vince McMahon Bret Hart animosity that has been going on for over 13 years now. This is the 13th year people have talked about Bret Hart and Vince McMahon. It's time to give it a rest. It's time to put it behind us. And if you have an opinion on the whole Bret Hart Vince McMahon situation, you can leave it here on our YouTube channel. You can send me an email through YouTube, or you can send me an email through MySpace or Facebook, or you can send me an email the original way by opening up your email account and composing a message to hewrestling@hotmail.com. Our universal redirectional links to our social network pages are coming up right now. MySpace.com/HEW Entertainment Radio. Facebook.com, type in my name, Jonathan Clarke. When you're on YouTube.com, you can find our YouTube channel where all our video content is posted on a frequent basis by going to YouTube.com and typing in the YouTube channel name, Jonathan Clarke 22. All the links are available in our official website as well.